Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, and hello to everyone. So welcome to the second consensus meeting. I'm pleased and delighted and honored to have as co-chairs Dr. Androula Eleftheriou and Dr. Michael Angastiniotis. Hello to both. Dr. Androula.
Hello, Eleni, and thank you very much for taking up this important moderation after Dr. Hadibur has informed us that he has some internet connections. So thank you very much, and welcome all to this second consensus meeting on iron chelation and their effectiveness, an issue that is very important to TIF. And we have shown how important it is realizing and recognizing the naked truth around the world that less than 10% are actually receiving effective chelation, and even less than that are actually undergoing accurate iron load monitoring for improving the effectiveness of the chelation. Therefore, we are very happy to hear our experts here. And if I may introduce Eleni, the first speaker, who is a long-term collaborator, invaluable collaborator, professor, supporter. No need for introduction to the audience, this very special academic who has contributed significantly to the research, to the better understanding, and even more, I should say, research focused on iron chelation. Professor Porter, how is safety and quality of chelation drugs defined in your perspective?
Hello, my name is John Porter. I've been asked to talk about how safety and quality of chelation drugs are defined. It's not an area that I'm expert in, but I've learned quite a lot as a result of preparing for this, and it's clearly an important area. So it seems to me that there are several areas in which we might think about the safety and quality of the way we deliver drugs. The first is the preclinical development. A lot of work, trouble goes into developing the chemicals which are going to make up future chelators in the laboratory, and also animal toxicology. This is demanded by regulatory authorities. And then in the pre-registration phase, there are phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials, which are pretty tightly regulated, and which I have been involved in, and I know there's a lot of scrutiny to the quality of these trials generally. And then after the drug is registered, there is post-marketing for surveillance to see if there's anything that comes up in the post-marketing arena which was missed as a result of the way the trials were studied, or perhaps because the trials were relatively small. And there are usually post-registration studies which are done either by the companies that develop the drugs, or indeed by other individuals who feel there's still things to learn. But what I'm going to talk about today is generic medications in countries either not recognizing the patent system, and these have been India and China to some extent, but more recently, after the expiry of a drug patent. And this is particularly exampled by Exjade. And Exjade was obviously developed in a conventional way by Novartis, but it's coming to the end of its patent, and already in India, there's a generic version of Exjade, Esunra, which is available. This has been overseen by Novartis, and the quality control should be equivalent to Exjade. But when I've traveled to foreign meetings, and particularly in India, I've noticed that patients are not just taking this, they're taking Desirox, which is made by Cipla in India, Desifur, which is made by Natco in India. There's another one called Defrijet, which is again made in India by Sun Pharmaceuticals. And there's an Iranian version of Exjade called Osferal. So can we be confident that all of these are the same thing as the ones we're, for example, writing about in our guidelines? So this is the Sunraz, it appears on the web. This is Desirox from Cipla. This is Desifur from Natco. This is Defrijet. And this is Osferal. So there's a lot going on there. And I'm going to say, therefore, a bit, about the way in which generics have developed. Now, generics began in 1935 when Khwaja Hamid founded Cipla. And this was really encouraged by a mission from Gandhi originally. And the idea was to supply drugs at low costs compared with Western medicine. And this initially went very well. And in the 1980s, the USA began allowing import of such generics, and Cipla and other generic makers became heroes to some extent of people who criticized big pharma. And in 2000, this admiration grew further when Cipla were able to provide a version of HIV drug at very little cost. So this was all going very well and was very much the high tide watermark for generics. However, more recently, there's increasing concern about the safety and regulation of generics. Now, there's a positive to generics, and one is an obvious one, is cost. And nowadays, a lot of generics are imported even into the United States and save the United States system a lot of money. The problem is that not all generics are made equal, as someone has very elegantly said. Some can be made more or less potent by the medicine they're mimicking than the medicine they're mimicking, but may release the drug into the drug into the bloodstream in a way which is not intended. Also, the regulatory requirements for a generic are not the same as for a primary product, and so in terms of the purity, the manufacturing, and the pharmacokinetics of the generic, they're not so tightly regulated. And so the FDA has long regulated American industry by making surprise visits to manufacturing plants. But when this has occurred outside the United States, they haven't really had the resources to do this to the same level of scrutiny. And for people who are making generics, that there's a big imperative to make drugs cheaply and quickly. And if there isn't scrutiny, there's a potential problem there. So there are many articles on this, how the US regulators are struggling to keep up with the global market, particularly outside the US. Now, they have stepped up scrutiny outside the United States, but there is still concern that it's not keeping up. I won't go to that slide for reasons of time. Now, there are consequences to this. In Africa, doctors regularly find that drugs for AIDS, for example, bacterial infection, and under conditions, the scrutiny of this is underpowered. And in the United States, imports from India now make up 40% of all generics used. So that needs to be scrutinized. 80% of active ingredients used in both generic and brand name medications come from India and China. And an example of what can go wrong, for example, in 2007, when scores of kidney patients across the United States died from allergic reactions after dialysis, experts traced the cause to a contaminant in heparin provided by a Chinese plant contracted by Baxter. So scrutiny, regulation does matter. What's the outlook here, and how is it going to be relevant to thalassemia treatment? The World Health Organization has established some plants that follow a definition of good management practice, which is a good idea for drug manufacture, but there's no international regulatory body that exists to enforce it. The FDA is overstretched. Even brand name companies are increasingly hiring poorly regulated Indian and Asian plants to make their ingredients and formulation. There's a big problem in knowing the composition and safety of even some of the main products. What are the implications for iron chelation? Patients need to know that what they are receiving, its purity and its quality of manufacture, are the same thing as happened in the original clinical trials. So that when someone such as myself writes guidelines, we write guidelines based on the data that was provided from the original clinical trials. And we're assuming that the patients are receiving the same stuff. And if they're not, there's a problem, because the drug levels may be higher or lower, and they may be less effective or more toxic. It's a really important issue. So as a result of that, I'd just like to conclude that we cannot assume that iron chelation is as safe or as effective as we would like to imagine, and that we need a push to just make sure that when people are receiving generics, that we know where they're coming from, how they're made, and how pure they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Porter, for a very insightful introduction to this meeting. And now, Dr. Michael Angastignotis and Mrs. Michela Bissat will take the floor. Dr. Michael Angastignotis needs no introduction because he's TIF's very own Doctor Without Borders and medical advisor, whether Mrs. Michela Bissat is a member of the board of directors and, of course, the administrative director of the Chronic Care Center in Lebanon. Is the continuous supply of drugs an element of safety? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
I would like to thank TIF for inviting me to take part of this very important meeting, and I'm honored to be with Dr. Angastignotis in this session. Indeed, continuous supply of drug is an element of safety and a major concern for patient organizations. We are concerned about the availability of several drugs, iron chelators, and their affordability. Of course, the cost of iron chelation is very high, and sometimes even the co-payment is unaffordable by the patients. The reimbursement system sometimes could be very long, and it will affect the continuous supply for the patient. At the government level, the government coverage sometimes is not as we would like it to be, and it is due to the number of patients. For example, in countries with huge number of patients, the government is unable to provide patients with continuous supply. Another factor could be the adherence to the treatment, the adherence of the patient himself, and sometimes the adherence is related to the quality of the supplies the patient is provided with, like the Telasets or the POPs. Another factor also is the cost and the availability of the monitoring tests, and also the geographic location of the patients. For example, if the patient is in a remote area, his doctor would be reluctant to give him a certain chelator that could cause neutropenia. So many factors play a role in the continuous supply of chelating agents, and many barriers are there for the availability of different types of chelation or generics. One of them is the process of registration of drugs in the Ministry of Health that could be sometimes very long and complicated. Companies are concerned about their market share, and they are motivated when they have a big market share, whereas when the number of patients is limited, they feel that they don't have a big interest in registering the drug. The deregistration or replacement of non-identical product could be a problem, and usually in governments, when governments supply directly the chelators, usually they tend to supply only one chelators, do tenders, or combine their purchasing power in one chelator. I was asked to give the example of Lebanon, especially that it is in times of crisis at the moment. So I'll give you a quick background. So about Lebanon, we are a small country. The Chronic Care Center is a patient organization and the only center for thalassemia. We follow around 700 patients. We have 3 chelators available, and our government provides a large number of patients with 1 oral chelator. So companies don't have really the incentive to register generic products because the market share is very small. We have a restricted number of patients and very few new cases due to our successful prevention program. Before the crisis, we had chronic issue with continuous supply. Mainly, we had an issue with desferal shortage, which is a worldwide shortage, and it is caused by the supply chain of the company, and also an issue with the shortening of the expiry of the product, which makes the stock management more and more difficult and affect the continuous supply. We had also to face the deregistration of desferal at the time of the registration of JMU, which made desferal removed from the essential drug lists. Therefore, it's no more reimbursed by the third-party payers, and it is really, it was really an issue, and we had to import it under a special license. The Chronic Care Center is maintaining its position to only purchase brand names or approved generics, and we had issues with the reimbursement, and here the collaboration with the drug companies came in, and we could, through the drug companies, have patient support programs whereby the company would support the patient to get his first dose or to help him out with his co-payment. Now comes the real problem, which is the severe economic recession that hit Lebanon recently. We had 93% of the devaluation of our currency. So desferrioxamine became non-subsidized, and therefore it is 10 times more expensive. Just to give you an idea, 7 ampoules are equal to the minimum wage in our country for the time being. So the Chronic Care Center had to find the appropriate funds to be able to get desferal for the patients, and this caused a small interruption or a short interruption in the drug supply. Here again, I would like to thank TIF for their donation of deferiprone and other supplies. This maintained our supply to patients and of course, affected positively their quality of care. We are at the moment very concerned about the possibility that the government might replace the brand oral chelator with a less effective or less suitable chelator for patients. Of course, we don't have any issue with generics. We have issues with copies. So I hope that the government will maintain his coverage for the patients, or at least if they want to change to a good generic. We are also concerned at the center to have enough available funds to make available the two other chelators and maintain this quality of care. Despite all the difficulties we are going through, we as patient organization are making every effort to maintain this continuous supply of drugs to patients. Definitely advocacy is important to maintain continuous supply and to ensure availability of different chelators, and collaboration is key to patient safety. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle. Actually, the background to this consensus meeting is the need for thalassemia patients, iron overloaded patients, to have a continual presence of an iron chelator in their blood. And Professor Porter has discussed the issue of the quality of generic drugs. And from Michelle, we looked at the issue of the continual supply, because this is something that is shared by most of the population, most of the patient populations across the globe. In Lebanon, we know very well that expertise, clinical expertise exists, but factors outside the clinic actually manage to interrupt, as Michelle very well has described, and the patients in the end are the ones that suffer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think that we now move to the next session, which is what is the place and value of generic formulations in a healthcare system, and what are the elements of safety involved in their use. And we would like Dr. Hatibor, a long-term collaborator, thalassemia patient himself, with a huge contribution to the national services, but also international through his collaboration and work with TIF, to describe the thalassemia perspective in this context. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Mahmoud Hadipur from Iran, and speaking about the place and value of generic formulation in the healthcare system and the element of their safety. First, a disclosure. I have no relation with a pharmaceutical company involved in the field of thalassemia. No generic maker, no brand makers. According to World Health Organization, a good policy should have three key principles: quality, solidarity, and sustainability. The three key principle is very important for having affordable and safe medicine for patients. According to statistics, 2 billion people all over the world do not have sufficient access to essential medicine. What is the problem? The problem happened because of different human rights criteria, different economic capacity, different drug development process, and different social values in countries throughout the world. To have fair frame access, two parts of provision of drug should be responsible. First, government and advocacy group should be responsible for having standard and strong norms and standards. Having joint negotiation to decrease the price and make the price affordable. And the transparency is very important to know about the quality and safety of drugs. From other side, pharmaceutical companies should have transparency and ethical conduct pharmaceutical industry or would be open to discussion about price and making price affordable for different society. The question is, what is generic drug? Generic drug is a drug must be as same as the brand name in terms of formulation and active drug, active ingredient. If you want to have a generic drug, you should have some tests to prove the similarity between generic and the original one. The big question is it required to submit clinical data regarding safety and efficacy for generic drug? The answer is no, because when we want to prove the similarity, we can use two different methods. First, prove the similarity between active ingredients, and second, prove the similarity between formulation. To prove the similarity between active ingredients, we can use the method such as HPLC and MR. This sort of graph shows us the similarity between the active ingredient in generic one and brand one. When the space of release of a drug would be the same, we can say they are bioequivalence. What is that? In this slide, you can see the bioequivalence. The bioavailability of a generic and brand name is the same. The difference between copied and generic drug. The first difference is that a generic drug produced based on a brand name after expiration of patent duration. It is a matter of economics, but when we want to have a copied one, we need to install, for example, analysis method, which has not been published by original maker and validated. It makes the process of production copied drug too hard. There are lots of myths and facts about generic drug in terms of the time it takes activity in the body and the potency and the safety of it. The answer is that if a generic drug produced based on the norms and standards, all methods are wrong. Why generic drug is very important in the healthcare system in new era? As you can see here in this slide, we are penetrating a generic dominated era in the world because a lot of countries, especially developing countries, should rely on the low price medicine with good safety. Because of that, generic is a good part of medicine in developing and even developed one countries. But the problem is, all time we couldn't rely on generic drug. Why? As you can see in this slide, production without looking at the norms and standards cause lots of problems. In Sri Lanka, 4 cases of death were reported because of using substandard ciprofloxacin. Because of that, the standard and norms is very important, and authority should play a big role. What caused the problem? Developing country authority does not outline perfect and unshakable norms and standards. Different source of ingredients, active ingredient of course. Sometimes company change a good active ingredient into cheaper one, and it makes problem. And change in the process of production. The process of formulation sometimes got changed. Because of that, the quality of drug decreased. In this slide, it is clear that in some developing country, you couldn't find the unshakable norms and standards such as the developed country. It is a big problem. Impurity in active ingredient is very important matter in production of generic drug. Impurity can change the efficacy. Impurity can change the formulation. Impurity can produce the different polymorph. You can see the polymorph is not the shakeout molecule. It is the different arrangement in the molecule, as you can see in this slide. And impurity can affect safety directly. What causes poor pharmacovigilance in developing countries? Sometimes limited resource. They have no good resource to follow pharmacovigilance. Sometimes the lack of relation between pharmacists and physicians and authorities, and over-focusing on detecting ADR and failing in the matter related to substandard drugs. And above all, overlap between pharmacovigilance and pharmacomarketing in absence of ethical marketing code. In some developing countries, you couldn't find unshakable ethical marketing code. Because of that, some physicians play different roles as a clinician and as an advisor to pharmaceutical companies. World Health Organization help developing countries based on normative function, capacity building, and proliferation program. It is the time for us to do action. First, we should listen to the patient because World Health Organization define drug promotion as a process, start from an idea and end from satisfaction. So satisfying patient is very important part of the drug promotion. Second, patient-centered care supports active playing role of patients in the process of medication. So we should listen to the patient. Our activity should be pro-quality and not to be anti-generic propaganda. We should rely on all professionals to prove the quality of medicine used for patients. In this slide, you can see the problem in manufacturing, packaging, transportation, and storage condition of the drug. They can cause substandard drug, and the substandard drug can affect patients' lives. Because of that, we should start a challenging process to against substandard drug. Thank you very much for your attention.
Indeed, a comprehensive presentation. Do you agree, Dr. Androula?
Yes, I do agree. And this magnifies the importance of the contents of this presentation because it comes both from a very experienced pharmacist and the patient himself. And therefore, it gave us insights into the generic drugs and why we are bringing up this subject as Thalassemia International Federation. And it is not the first time. We've been struggling for years on how to ensure or what activities or actions we should be taking as an NGO in collaboration with our stakeholders, healthcare professionals and patients and families themselves on how to improve the quality of care they receive. And we have heard from Professor Porter and other international experts that have been writing and developing guidelines for the management of thalassemia, that effectiveness of quality of care relies on the quality of the individual components of care that we provide, whether the blood adequate, whether it's the safety and adequacy of blood, but whether it is quality drugs to provide effective chelation. Therefore, the quality, the effectiveness of the care very much relies, therefore, on the quality of the drug. And in the Western world, we are relying on FDA and or EMA approved, and therefore we are to a very great extent, although there is pharmacovigilance and other tools for helping us to actually monitor the effectiveness of, but also the safety of the drugs we are providing to patients. But these are to a very great extent go through clinical trials and extensive documentation of their safety and effectiveness and lead up to authorization and provision to our patients. Now, generics is something different. It is something that, and we know that the world has been shifting into the generic drugs for some years now, to contribute to the resilience and sustainability of the healthcare systems, that is, in terms of costs. But we've also been focusing on the quality and safety of these generic drugs. And this is what Hadibur has expanded on, and Professor Porter as well. And this is what our worries are with regards to patients across the world, where more than 80% of our population lives in countries where there is no, as Hadibur put it in his slides, respect to patency of drugs. Therefore, they can either produce, proceed and make copy drugs, because in the presence of a patency, the drug that is being produced is referred to as copy. And after the patency, also the widespread use of generics, for which we have no information on their bioequivalence, on their safety. Patients are not aware to ask. Treating physicians may also either be aware or not have the time or opportunity to actually discuss the quality of the generics. Therefore, Michael, the floor is yours.
Yeah, my comment really has to do with the need again for quality care. And quality care is what is going to give us good outcomes and good quality of life. And the availability of quality medication is extremely important. Hadipur was an extremely valuable contribution, because not only is he a pharmacist, not only is he a patient, but he actually comes from a country where generics are made in abundance. And patients have to deal with this. And one point that he made is that we have to listen to the patient's voice. Mm-hmm. Pharmacovigilance, which is what is going to give us information, what is going to tell us whether we're getting effectiveness and whether we're getting side effects and adverse effects is actually not practiced very efficiently, not only by the medical profession, but hardly anybody listens to or gets pharmacovigilance, if you like, feedback from the patient community themselves. So I want to re-emphasize again something which Hadipur said: listen to the patient, because that's how we're going to know how well we're treating them.
And touching on what Michael Angastignodis has just said, which is really important, is assessing effectiveness of iron chelation and, increasing doses or changing doses, or and the use of generic drugs can be even more expensive if the generic drug is not effective. So pharmacovigilance is very important and is one of the tools that we need to advocate for. Effectiveness of chelation may not be related to the dose or to the treatment or to the drug, but to the way the generic drug has been manufactured. And we need information, and we cannot get information in most of the times that we have tried to get information on bioequivalence and other aspects of the production of generic drugs. We have not been able to retrieve. Therefore, these are concerns, and they are concerns of TIF. If we put forward the data that we have compiled through a global review 2021 on the small percentage of the global patient population receiving chelation, and if part of this small percentage is also receiving unsafe or less effective chelation through the generic branch, is even more of concern. Therefore,
of course, Dr. Eleftheriou,
can we
may I add?
Can we have Professor Porter's last, comment on this?
Of course, before going to the interactive discussion, it's important for us here to clarify that we're working towards patient safety. So we want quality and we demand quality. So pharmacovigilance is indeed important where there is no proper and no such mechanism. So I see Professor Porter, and I think that it's time to continue with an interactive discussion on how to safeguard quality and safety of medicines, and especially copy drugs and generics. Professor Porter?
Thank you. This is an interesting session, and it's something I think that treating clinicians don't think about very much. And certainly preparing this talk's been a little bit of an eye-opener for me. In the UK and in Europe, we probably take it for granted that what we are prescribing is the real thing. But even there, it's not the case. As I showed in the talk, in the United States, 40% of generics come from outside the United States, and the vigilance on that is actually not very good. And I think there needs to be a global think about how generics are monitored and scrutinized. It's a real problem. So, yeah.
Porter touched on a very important aspect of the production of generic drugs. The active and expedient ingredients of these may come and may be produced well outside the Western world, yes. And that requires monitoring on a global basis and in a standardized way. Michelle? Anything from your part, of course? Okay, perhaps Michelle cannot hear us.
There is a problem in hearing. I would like to add a very useful fact and update is that the European Medicines Agency, in an effort to promote pharmacovigilance in low and middle income countries, has just started implementing a program providing scientific opinions for specific medicines and generics that are to be marketed in developing countries. And this is very important to be utilized by these countries because not all countries follow FDA's or EMA's or other regulatory authorities strict guidelines on manufacturing. So, Mrs. Michelle Abissad, could you please try to reconnect, to see if we can hear you?
Be difficult, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. That I think that we are all in agreement that okay, Michelle, do you have anything to add to this discussion from your side of the world? Michelle? Okay.
Okay, we just need a second. There is a minor technical issue.
Yes, I'm sorry for the technical issue, but this is a very important session, and it would be good to work on a list of generic medications that are of high quality, available for all the NGOs, and also it would be good to gather data on the quality of the generics circulated throughout the globe. Thank you.
You're right, and if I may just jump in, because this is a project that we have started a couple of months ago at TIF. We are mapping at the moment, at least in the context of thalassemia and hemoglobin disorders, we are mapping the generic drugs that are being used in the different countries, members of TIF through their national thalassemia associations. Already a long list of generic drugs is available in the office, and as part of the project, we'll be moving forward to see in which way their quality has been assured and what information the government of the countries can provide to us with regards to their quality in standards in terms of their production. There are many aspects of this project. There's a whole project referred to as generic drugs at TIF. So I think, Eleni, we move forward to the last two slides of what we feel the next steps are
So
with regards to.
We all agree that a call to action is needed.
And
So,
let me just, Eleni, sorry, let me just mention to the participants of this session that there was a previous session referred to as iron load monitoring, the quality and safety and effectiveness of that. And the action with regards to iron, let's call it iron load monitoring and chelation, will be in the context of these two slides that we feel that in the next steps that we feel that TIF should be taking, because we have seen that iron load monitoring tools are demonstrated as being available across the world, but nobody is touching or at all demonstrating the quality and the accuracy of these tools that are being used, including basic tools such as ferritin. Okay, thank you, Eleni. And I think Michael will be going through these last two slides.
Yes, and we are ready to show the two slides, Dr. Eleftheriou, just to remind our audience of what our proposals and suggestions are to address this very, very important issue.
So there is a great need for synergies and for action, because there is ample information, evidence and experience and tools that can be provided to patients for effective iron load monitoring and chelation. And it is a huge violation of rights not to invest in the already existing experience and tools. So we feel that synergies are required amongst all relevant stakeholders. There is a great need to advocate for patient-centeredness and universal health coverage across the world. And this is part of the Sustainability Development Goals of the United Nations by 2030. There is a necessity for application, implementation of disease-specific registries. and cost of service models in order for the governments and competent authorities to plan better and understand the cost effectiveness and towards their patients and the resilience of their medical and public health services if effective management is provided to the patients. And very importantly, the absence of quality standards is a great challenge contributing to ineffectiveness, and particularly with regards to MRI measurements and assessments. So training of healthcare professionals, including MRI specialists, should be a focus of activity and work for the next years to come. And this is what we have the vision as TIF to create an international patient iron alliance so that we can identify and fight for those elements that will increase the effectiveness of iron load monitoring and chelation, such as ways to apply quality standards, to monitor as effectively as possible iron load monitoring, to invest more in the existing FDA and EMA authorized methodologies while waiting for new methods and tools to come up. Strengthen the patient's engagement, views, and experience in every aspect of this project. And hopefully, or perhaps the establishment of a reference hub or iron load monitoring centers at country, regional, and international level is an idea and may contribute significantly for supporting the establishment of quality measures and cross-reference between countries and regions. And last but not least is the monitoring of the use of safe chelation drugs, because the expiration of patency in the last years has brought about the dramatic increase in the use of generic drugs, which we would like. It's a contribution, the use of generic drugs, to the sustainability of public health and healthcare systems. But drugs should be safe and effective for the patients. And we wish to know that the drugs that are used, how they are authorized, whether quality standards are used, bioequivalence studies are made, reactions and what reactions involving the patients and the treating physicians in order to identify weaknesses, safety, and effectiveness of these drugs. So the last two slides can be used for the consensus meeting on iron chelation drugs, because this way and this vision of TIF to move forward with iron load monitoring and chelation or more in a sense iron load control are included all on this slide. So thank you for your attendance, and I look forward to an interactive discussion and, more importantly, on a consensus on how we move forward with this very significant part of management of patients. Thank you. Michael.
So thank you very much, Dr. Eleftheriou. We have received a question. So if you have any questions, this is a request to the audience. You may share it with us. I see here a suggestion from Mr. George Constantinou, a board member of TIF. And of course, he proposes the production of an educational leaflet or guidelines on what to look for and what to check with regard to medicines and their safety. So Professor Porter, Dr. Eleftheriou, Dr. Angastiniotis, do you think that we could actually create a list of questions that could lead patients to ensure that they receive safe medicines?
My personal opinion, if I may start with that, is that whatever questionnaire we give to patients, the issue is that we need to listen to the patients, and we have to make it easier for the patients to express their issues, their side effects, the issues of availability. So basically, it's making pharmacovigilance easier for the patients and for some agency to be, especially local agencies, to be actually receptive to what they hear.
So thank you, Dr. Agostinotis. I don't know if Professor Porter has a specific view or would like to share any thoughts.
Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. So Mike brings an important thing to the table, which is the value of patient feedback. That's a challenge to get right, but it's an innovative approach, which I think TIF has a good potential handle on. But that alone won't be enough. We don't want the patients to be the fire alarm. We want to stop the fire. And the way of doing that is having proper safety monitoring and quality control. As I've learned, the regulatory authorities are extremely stretched, and the FDA probably doesn't have the resources to monitor how generic drugs, or other drugs in fact, are quality controlled outside the United States. There are attempts to do that, but that isn't working as well as it should. And what I'm wondering, and I'd be interested to know what the TIF members think, is I know the WHO is interested in this. They don't have any power as such, but could the WHO help in some way to get a way of, just for example, looking at the purity of drug. Purity of drug chemically is actually fairly cheap to do. It can be done properly, and it can be done sporadically so that there are kind of unannounced examinations of the purity of the drug. In terms of pharmacokinetics and bioavailability, that's much more difficult because it involves trials of human beings. But as a basic start, the purity and content of the drugs as supplied as generics and advertised could be done with relatively modest, and it could be maybe coordinated WHO or even by TIF. I think that would be reassuring if we knew the purity and makeup of what is actually being given with some of these generics.
And this is a very sensitive issue, Professor Porter. You know, authorities in a country, I don't think they will be very willing to give any information or go through any quality. And coming to think of the patients themselves, listen to the patients, and you know, the pharmacovigilance point, we have been evidencing in a particular country, in a lot of countries, but in a particular country, there was evidence of patient complaining continuously and for a long time about the adverse, as they called it, reactions with regards to generic drug they were receiving. There was no response to any of our requests in identifying how this generic drug was went through its quality standards and everything. So there is a need for a more regulated, high-level process to actually listen to the patients. Even listening to the patients was not practiced in a particular country. I have no in mind, but we cannot disclose. And there are many such countries. Patients are reporting, patients are complaining. Okay, it's underestimated in a lot of countries, and we should be listening and we should be advocating for the pharmacovigilance, obviously. But in many countries where these are being produced are actually countries that don't listen to the patient's voice, and even their treating doctors may not be listening. So it is a complicated matter of actually putting all these elements together.
Yep. So
allow me to add. I'm so sorry to intervene, but I think that this is important. It's a suggestion. coming from Mr. Deschal, I think, and he thinks and suggests that it's a good idea for TIF to develop an adverse reactions report form to allow patients in those countries where there is no such thing as pharmacovigilance or medicine safety reporting to report adverse reactions. So I wanted to share this with you as Mr. Deschal could not join the live discussion. So Professor Porter.
Yeah, so that's an important point, and the idea of getting patients to act as the fire alarm is a really good one. However, I still think there are opportunities to look at what we're actually giving patients, and it wouldn't require the permission of countries' regulation. You just buy the stuff on the internet, and then you look at the purity of it, and you know you could even anonymize it. You know, say product A, product B, product C. If you're worried about being sued, I think it would be really reassuring to know if we looked at 10 generic and we found that all of them were clean, they were the real deal. That would be very reassuring. Obviously, there's differences in bioavailability, which wouldn't be addressed by that. But at least as a start, we could look at the purity of what's being given, and that wouldn't be expensive.
Thank you, Professor Porter.
That is a good idea. No, I'm just commenting on that. That's a good idea. If one can buy, just purchase the product and have a dedicated lab for the chemical analysis, just to give some indication.
We have a few seconds before finalizing and closing the session. Last words from Dr. Eleftheriou, Dr. Angastiniotis, and Professor Porter.
Just from me, I just wanted to remark that most regulatory authorities actually look at bioequivalence, but they do not look into impurities. There are regulations about good manufacturing practice, but again, the end product is very rarely actually examined and properly, if you like, assessed until the patient reacts.
Well,
Professor Porter, sorry, I want Dr. Eleftheriou to have the very last word. So, Professor Porter.
I agree with everything that's been said. I think we've raised this as an important issue, and I think TIF is in a good position to help take this forward by consensus.
Thank you. I think these are my last words as well. I mean, we are very concerned about the quality. We are very concerned about our patients to receive care, but we're even more concerned to receive the appropriate care, and for the care and for the drugs more particularly to be effective and safe. And effectiveness comes with quality, and therefore will be focused in the next few years on this generic drug project to see how we can help the patients around the world. And having the last word, I would like to thank very much the presenters, Professor Porter, for his time. He's been overloaded with work in the context of our 2 international conferences, and I take this opportunity to express our deepest appreciation. And I'm sure he will be collaborating with us on a consensus document that we feel we should be putting forward in the context of this project. Thank you very much, Eleni, for your moderation, and Michael. Michelle as well.
And thank you everyone for watching. Stay tuned because a very interesting meeting on blood safety comes up, and it would be very interesting to watch. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.